So we get a lot of questions about schooling on the road, particularly in relation to Ryan. Ryan's been on the road in some form since he was 2 years old, and when we used to travel Australia when he was 2 or 3 or even 4, people would often say to us, "Oh, it's great that you're doing this while he's young, because once he starts school, you'll have to stop." And I was always a bit baffled by that sort of thinking, and I would say, well, why do we have to stop? And certainly we haven't had to stop once he's reached school age, and in fact there are so many options available for schooling on the road for kids that are traveling, which is fantastic. So we just thought we'd talk about a couple of those options. So to start by talking about a little bit about what we've actually done with our child. As I say, there's lots of options. This is just what's worked for us so far. So Ryan started travelling Australia when he was 2, and when he turned 4, we enrolled him in Distance Ed Kindy. So we did that through the Brisbane School of Distance Education, and they had a fantastic e-Kindy program that he used for the entire year. He had a wonderful teacher called Miss Gillian, and that was a really beneficial program for us. It was really flexible and it worked really well with our lifestyle. We then moved to New Zealand. And Ryan enrolled in, I suppose you could call it real school while we were here. So we stopped for 2 years and we rented a house, and we bought our caravan and we renovated and we saved and we had our second child. And during those 2 years, Ryan had, I guess, a pretty normal life and went to a normal school, if that's what you want to call it. And he really enjoyed that. He fitted right into that system quite fine, despite his unorthodox upbringing to that point. But now we're back on the road again, and so we're back to, I suppose, road schooling and other alternative schooling options. So Ryan's now 7, he's in his 3rd year of primary school, and we've chosen to do Distance Ed again, and this time we're doing it through the Te Kura Distance School, which is a fantastic option available here in New Zealand. But it's not the only option. There are lots of options available to parents and kids that are travelling. So we thought we'd go through a couple of those options just to start you thinking about what options might work for you if this is something that you're thinking about doing with your own family. So there's more or less 3 options if you want to school your kids on the road. There is something called unschooling, there is homeschooling, or there's distance education. Depending on where you are in the world and what your local laws and rules are and what your local resources are will depend on which option, and of course what your own family dynamic is will depend on which option is most likely to work for you. So unschooling is exactly what it sounds. It's basically not doing any formal or traditional schooling at all. It's just letting your kids learn naturally as they go. This is particularly useful for travelling kids because you absolutely do learn an awful lot on the road. Just being with your parents, with your family, going to different places, experiencing different things, you learn an unbelievable amount without even realising that you're learning. So I completely understand why people choose the unschooling route. Are you right?
Get some of this.
Okay, I'll help explain it to you in just a minute, alright? Do you want to have just wait for a minute? So for us, because we're on the wrong road long term, we chose not to go the unschooling route. We decided we wanted a little bit more structure. But if we'd only been travelling for 6 or 12 months, I absolutely think this is the option that we would have chosen. We would have just taken him out of normal school, had 6 or 12 months off school, not worried about schooling at all, and just let him learn naturally as he does. But some people do this long term. They do it for years on the road. People do it to varying degrees. Some people still do a little bit of their own sort of schooling as part of the unschooling model. Some people don't do anything at all. That's their choice and whatever works for their family. So that is an option. Obviously, in some parts of the world, this might have problems from a legal perspective. I mean, even here in New Zealand, you must legally enroll your children in some sort of school. So a lot of the families here, at least and in Australia too, either apply for a homeschool exemption and then take their children out and do unschooling, or even in Australia, I know a lot of families, they leave from Victoria and they just tell the school, oh, we're moving to New South Wales. They go do their 12-month lap and then they come back to the same school and go, oh, hey, we're back, and they just re-enroll, and nobody really bothers about the fact that they had a year off. So there's a few different ways around that. In some places of the world, it's not a problem anyway. You don't need to worry about it. So that's unschooling. So another option is homeschooling. A lot of people think of homeschooling and they think of all of these options as being homeschooling because they're, at home and they're not in a traditional school setting. But homeschooling itself really does still follow, a general curriculum. It's just that you're setting that curriculum and you're their teacher and you're working through that yourself. So it's still a little bit different to unschooling, and it's still a little bit different to distance education where you would have a teacher that's just distant from you. We chose not to go down the homeschooling route because I didn't feel that I was qualified to fit that teacher role. So I am not a teacher, I'm a nurse. I can teach him about, biology and health, and I've got a few of my areas of expertise, but I have no idea what kids that are 7 are supposed to be learning. I don't know what they normally do in the curriculum. I just didn't feel like I was qualified to set an entire curriculum and follow it and, meet targets and that sort of thing. Also, depending on where you are in the world, homeschooling sometimes has to follow quite a lot of rigorous structural things to meet from a legal perspective. So you have to prove that you've got a curriculum, you have to outline your curriculum, you have to prove that you're following that curriculum, and you have to still provide reports and all that sort of stuff. So homeschooling certainly can be a lot of work. It's not as simple as just taking your kids out and going, I'll teach them at home. That's more of an unschooling type scenario. Again, a lot of these vary depending on from place to place. Some people might not agree completely with my definition of them, but they're just some ideas to think about. Yes, baby. And your other option is distance ed. So distance education in Australia and New Zealand at least is a pretty well established thing. Particularly in Australia, it's been around for a really long time because there's kids that are quite remote that live on cattle stations, and they've been doing school of the air and things like this for 100 years. This is not a new concept. But I guess it's more of a new concept for kids that are travelling. So here in Australia and New Zealand, there are a lot of distance schools, and they are a perfectly reasonable alternative to a traditional school. And they follow the same curriculum as regular school does, and they're still school. They're school, but it's just that it's not set in a classroom. It's in a different setting, and you're facilitating a teacher that is, remote from you. This is not always an option in other parts of the world. So I find people that contact us from Europe or America or things like that, sometimes they're a little bit more baffled by this system than people from Australia and New Zealand. Because as soon as I say to people in Australia or New Zealand, oh, it's just like doing school of the air, they know what that is, and they know that there are station kids that do that. And I say, look, it's just like that. It's just that we do it on the road. So it's a bit more of a concept that we understand in this part of the world anyway. So I like distance ed because I am not the teacher, I am a facilitator. I still do most of the hands-on stuff with me and my husband, but we don't set the work, and we don't mark the work, we don't report the work, we don't make sure that he is meeting a particular standard or that he is following a particular curriculum. That's all done by his school and his qualified teacher. So this year we're doing distance ed through Te Kura. This is a New Zealand distance ed school. It's a really big school. It's actually technically one of the biggest schools in New Zealand because it has students from all over the country. And it also has teachers all over the country. So Ryan's teacher's actually based in Hamilton, where we were based before we started travelling. We have managed to meet her a couple of times when we've passed back through Hamilton, which is fantastic. If we'd been based in Wellington, we'd have had a teacher there, which is fantastic. So they try and give you a teacher that's local to the area that you are based. For this particular school, you have to meet certain criteria. So unfortunately, not just anyone can go, oh, look, I'm not really a fan of the school system, I want to put my kids into distance ed. You have to meet certain criteria, and one of those criteria that we meet is that we're an itinerant family, so we're able to enroll that way. We're only a small portion of the school though. There are people that are enrolled because they're far away, there are people that are enrolled because for medical reasons they can't go to schools, lots of different reasons. So it's a really mixed bag of people that do the distance ed. In Australia, that can also be the case. Sometimes, depending on the schooling, you need to meet certain criteria. When we did it, the eKindy, we had to prove that we were itinerant then as well to access the program. So it just depends on the local school. Australia has a lot more options for distance ed than New Zealand, which is good and bad. Sometimes there are too many options and it can be quite overwhelming to find the school that fits you and your needs. And Australia also has a state-by-state system, so that can get really confusing as well. So, you might have a friend that's from New South Wales and they've accessed a program that you think looks really good, and you might have trouble accessing that program if you're from Victoria and don't have a local address in New South Wales. So it's a little bit more complicated in Australia, whereas here in New Zealand, this is our main option. It's one of our only options, and I think it's a fantastic option, so we're quite lucky in that sense. As I understand it, if you're an Aussie or a Kiwi and you live overseas, you can generally still access programs from, if you're a citizen, from your countries, but again, I could be wrong about that. Look into them. So we figured if Ryan's a dual citizen, he's Australian and New Zealand, so we figured if the New Zealand system didn't work for him, we could always look at Australian options, but we haven't had to go down that route. So a little bit more about that. So he has his one teacher, but he also has access to a bunch of different online classes that he can choose from that are run by all different teachers. So this term he's chosen one about music and lyrics, which is great because I'm not very musical. He's chosen one about caring for animals as an extra thing on top of the regular main core work that he does. His teacher, we do a lot of paper-based stuff at his age, but we do a bit of computer-based work as well. So his teacher sends out a bunch of work that we work through. So he's got a maths book that he's working through at the moment. But we also really need to have a really good tablet. Well, it's actually really good is not quite true. It doesn't have to be a really good tablet at all. It just has to be a tablet. This one's a couple of years old and it certainly isn't expensive. So we use that to access all of our online classes. And he also has a video catch-up with his teacher at least once a week. So in order to be able to do the online component, we really need good internet. So we use a Wireless Nation mobile broadband modem. So that so far has worked everywhere that we've gone in New Zealand. I'm sure there are places it doesn't, but we haven't found them yet. And that's really good because it gives us quick, reliable, fast, available internet everywhere we go, which is awesome. We don't need to worry about our download or our upload limits or things freezing. Normally we have no trouble. So really decent, reliable internet is a must if you're going to do distance ed with your kids, I think, even if it's partly paper-based. What else? This school actually also does some face-to-face catch-up. So in Hamilton, they do one once a week, and when we do happen to be in the area visiting grandma or grandpa or whatever, we do go to those. So that's great. It's a chance to catch up with other kids. And we're going to try and catch a few of those around the country as well. So they do some face-to-face catch-ups. Some of the questions we get asked about road schooling or distance ed or homeschooling is about socialisation. Sorry, I'm interrupting counting. It's about socialisation, and I think that's a really important one. Like, I think you don't just go to school to learn maths, you go to school to learn how to socially interact and fit in with your peer group. But we've got around that by making sure that we get around that by catching up with other kids and other families at every opportunity. It's very spirited maths that we're doing here. So I don't think Ryan's missed out on that at all. And he also still keeps in touch with his school friends from when he was at real school via messenger apps, and we catch up with them wherever possible as well. The other thing I think sometimes can be a bit lacking in the homeschooling option is a variety of voices. So if you're, Ryan, all right, that's enough, please. So if you're the only person that's schooling your kids, it can be easy to put unconscious bias into what you're teaching them, and maybe then they only hear one voice as opposed to having a different teacher every year, having different teachers for different subjects, and having a variety of other children around them. Some people think that's a positive, and I suppose it can be because you can limit a little bit what your child gets from outer influences. But I think it takes a village to raise a child, and I think a variety of voices is really important. So again, we get around that, and also I don't want to be the one doing this all the time. It's exhausting having to sit here and do maths every day. I don't want to do that. I want him to learn from a variety of people. I think we're doing karate at the same time. So again, we get around this by drawing on other people's... All right, you're being a bit crazy now. We get around this by drawing on other people's expertise whenever possible. So I'll take anyone. If you've got a skill that you can teach my kid, hey, you're welcome to come and teach my kid. So we get grandparents involved, we get other families involved. We just try and really mix up the people that are teaching our children. So for example, recently at a campsite there was a lovely lady there that had a kayak, and she was going out kayak fishing, and she taught Ryan a whole heap about fish, about fishing, about filleting fish, about using a kayak. She took him out kayak fishing, all that stuff that I can't teach him because I don't have that knowledge. And he had that different voice, that different interaction with someone from a different generation children. One time I remember we were out in outback Western Australia and we came across this gold fossicker, and he was wonderful, and he just taught Ryan so much about fossicking for gold and about different rocks and geology. And so we draw on those people at every opportunity. If you've got something you can teach us and Ryan and even our daughter who's only 18 months old, you just come in and we're happy to take your knowledge. So I think that's a really positive part of schooling on the road, as well as all the different people that you meet. So that's a couple of options to get you thinking about school on the road. It's not perfect, you know, it does require a bit of work from us, but what I like about it is we know what he's learning, we know where he's at, we can help him work through things. Sometimes there are tears, sometimes there are fights, sometimes the tears are not even his, sometimes they're mine. It's not always easy, I totally get that, but it's been really good for us with our lifestyle. So being able to fit in schooling while still being able to live this amazing lifestyle and travel, and still have him learn about all the other amazing things that he learns about while we travel, while still being able to do maths and reading and science and music is, I think, a really fabulous opportunity. Sometimes people get a little bit judgy about our kid not being in real school. It's a rarity. And I think that maybe that's misguided, because really the way that we learn together as a family is pretty amazing, and I think he's doing really well. I don't think school has to be traditional classroom schooling. I don't have a problem with that type of schooling, but I don't think it's the only way, and we're certainly learning that ourselves, aren't we, Ryan?